Hi, Tom.
Hi, it's
Good
been a
to see
while.
you again. It has
Yeah,
been a while, and we're
yeah.
back here in January of 2024. You taking a little bit of break. We took a little break so you could focus on putting together some teachings and doing some research. And you're ready to share what you're working on regarding the root teachings of Christianity. So today we're going to do an overview to see what you've been working on, and then we'll break it down into some sessions. But
Mhm.
so what's been happening and what's on your mind?
Well, there are a few elements. First of all, I started this in 2007, so it's been a while. Not that I've been at it consistently since then, but I've been working on it on and off. And it came to me in 2007 that the way we looked at Christianity was fundamentally inaccurate, that we were taking it as a belief system and the system of practices that we've adopted based on the belief system. I don't think in all instances, and I'm not saying it's worthless or anything like that, but I don't think it's the most mature approach to what the original teachings of Jesus were. So, what were the original teachings of Jesus? And the digging into this is what I've been doing ever since. So, what would those teachings be based on what we know, which is what is recorded basically in the New Testament, because there's very little historical evidence that Jesus even existed, since he was part of a small cult within Judaism at the time and was put to death at that. It's like there's not a lot of material, especially back then. They weren't that specific in teaching chronology or any kind of deeper understanding of history. In the Roman Empire, you got the Roman Empire's version of what was going on. So it's a little difficult to get it in terms of history, although historians and other people have been working on that for quite some time. What you can find out, I think, is basically looking at the elements that are there in essentially the Gospels, but really the entire New Testament, maybe with possible exception of the book of Revelation, which you could put any interpretation on, and people often do. And that is there an overall theme that seems to be what Jesus is teaching? What is he trying to do? And you can see in a few passages where he talks about preaching the kingdom of heaven to the poor. But what does that mean? What's preaching the kingdom of heaven? And usually we say, well, it's all of this material that we find in the New Testament, the overlap of teachings, especially in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and that what he was giving was an understanding that we were saved by him, and was saved by him by his crucifixion and death and resurrection and ascension. That he paved the way. You can see this in especially Paul's letters, that he paved the way, and if we follow his way, we'll follow him, and we will be saved from all suffering, which is what I believe saved is. If you're being saved, you're being saved from something, and that would be suffering. So what I found, though, is, yeah, that may be true. I'm not going to deny that. I don't know. But it seems to me that he taught a whole lot more than that. And what those words actually mean and what it's actually about is something far greater than we give it credit for. And we can apply these teachings in ways that are even more life-changing than the way we apply them now, if we take the deeper meanings and see what it can do for us. Now, the problem, of course, is, to me, when I look at this, the Gospels and the accounts you find there are what were written for the general public. They were given out to people, and I think there was an undercurrent of teaching that was not given out to the general public, and deliberately not given out, maybe, but certainly not given out in the Gospels. They're hinted at in the Gospels. These elements are there, and if you can pick up on them, and I heard them for more years than I can count and did not pick up on them, but after having this shift in point of view about what may be going on here, I started seeing these elements that were most definitely there that we just kind of ignore normally. We don't really, yeah, okay, that's there. It's kind of like, to me, for example, I used to have sessions with a rabbi where I was teaching him various aspects of breathing and relaxation and stretching and so on. And he taught me quite a bit about Judaism, kind of in return. And I brought up the story of Moses, and I said, this is a very strange story. This isn't like, some spiritual enlightenment going on like you find in other traditions. This is a very strange story of, it. Looking at it objectively, it seems almost like a science fiction story. And he said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And so I laid out the different elements. And after I did, he said, oh, yeah, we're taught these things and we don't even question. We don't look at them from another perspective. I was told, okay, I can't say this in general, but I was told, you don't question this. This is like, the word of God. This is the way it is. And there's no more to be said. You can find out more by studying it, by getting into all the details of it, but it's the word of God and, beginning and end of story. And the first question I would have there is, how do you know? Where did you get that idea from? And to me, everyone undoubtedly got that idea from somebody else who said it was the word of God. Maybe some people had some revelation while reading it or some sort of experience, and fine. I don't know how that necessarily makes it the word of God, though, if you had that experience. If you had some insight, some understanding, a lot of people attribute it to God, but didn't you have that experience? And I'm not saying
you for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to circle back a moment, because are you saying that perhaps there is when we study Christianity and we look at, this wisdom tradition and it's the sacred texts, we have a lot of questions, and the same questions come up over and over again. And we just kind of take it as part of Christianity that these are the questions, and sometimes they can't be answered and we struggle with them.
Yeah.
But are you saying then that perhaps there is a way to understand or answer these questions that seem to be embedded in this teaching, and that's what you mean by this kind of maturity, and like if we have a certain kind of maturity, if that's the word for it, that we could come to understand or answer those questions?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That we can understand what the teachings actually were, and we're not doing that. And why are we not doing it? I don't really know for sure, just that we're not. I think the biggest clue here is all of the different denominations of Christianity. There are so many of them because so many people have other points of view about the very same teachings that are written down in just, a few pages in the New Testament. You can take one passage and find a whole bunch of people talking about all kinds of different ways of looking at it. What I think is it's not in personal ego-based understanding, that this understanding comes from another level of consciousness, which sounds kind of vague, ambiguous, but in reality, it's not. To me, establishing yourself in a state of consciousness that is not dependent upon the ego as your center of operations is the crucial factor in understanding what's actually being taught in the New Testament. So that we can all do this. It's built into us. It's part of nature. It's part, I think, of our striving for happiness and fulfillment and peace and so on. But we keep looking for those things in the outside world and they're obviously not there. And if they are there, they're there for a short period of time, and then they're not there anymore, or they change in their character or whatever. To find this permanent peace and this permanent fulfillment, you have to go beyond a personal activity in the waking state and in the outside world.
But what if you're not a Christian?
Doesn't matter. This is everyone. This is built in by nature. It could be built into animals. Since I'm not, a dolphin or a dog, I can't say for sure, but I would not be surprised if it was built into everything. Because if everything has its origins in one place, that's the wrong word, one source, you can't usually use any words because they don't work when it comes to this, which is a stumbling block in trying to teach it. But it's the pure experience built into a human nervous system, at least, if not the nervous systems of everything, and I think it probably is, that produces this kind of point of view, this kind of perspective, this state of awareness. And that is the key word here, awareness. What are we aware of? Usually in our everyday lives, we're aware of the people we interact with, the world we interact with, maybe how the body feels or how we feel emotionally. That doesn't go much beyond that, usually. We're totally focused in what we call reality. Okay, I would say that we're missing most of life. That most of life is within us. Most of our awareness is within. That we're skirting the surface of our awareness, taking in the impressions from the outside world, allowing it to work its, I was going to say magic, but it's not, sometimes it's black magic on us. And the result is, this is how we view the world. The world is my set of experiences. And someone else's set of experiences.
It sounds like you're bridging into other teachings like Maya and the illusion.
Yeah, I think that's a possible basis. But to experience Maya as your actual everyday life takes a whole lot of growth of awareness. We usually just feel that this is reality, that becoming aware of what reality consists of takes a very long time. So to get to that level of Maya, this is not really what it seems to be, and to spontaneously experience it all the time, that's a lot of growth that has to happen. So I wouldn't get there yet, but I would say that our experience is how we view the world. It's not reality with a capital R. It's reality with a small r. It's our version. It's our opinion. It's our likes and dislikes. It's our experiences that triggered certain things in us. That's what it is. Not, what we tend to do is we have a negative experience and we blame the experience or the person that started the experience, and never look at ourselves and our reaction to that experience as being the source of our feelings. We have to take into account what we're doing inside in addition to what we're doing outside. So this whole realm of unconscious awareness has to become more conscious. When it does, we're not as attached to our ego reactions and our individual and personal understandings of things, and mistake those understandings for the way life is.
And so what you're saying here is that there are teachings in Christianity that are, in a sense, hidden from us in plain sight.
Yeah, plain sight. They've been there all the time. We've been looking at them from an ego point of view because that's all we know. We have not been introduced to any way to see the world beyond our own individual points of view. And that's why you have so many versions of Christianity. I think Jesus was after unity. I think that's somewhere in the Gospel of John, the Last Supper. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. But Obviously, unity was his theme, and fragmentation has been the result. Is that the fault of Jesus' teachings? No. It's our fault for taking them at a level that they were not given from. He came from a certain level of consciousness. Otherwise, why did we listen to him? Did he know more? Did he have more awareness? Was he like every other person? It's presented. No, he wasn't. He was something set apart. That he had this wisdom, he had this knowledge, and he could impart these awarenesses or energies to people so that they could have it too. I think this is the kingdom of heaven that was being preached. It had to be done kind of step by step because people were not ready for what he had to say. I think they're probably still not ready for what he had to say. But so what was given out to the public was kind of like essentially like a mystery play in ancient Greece. You know, the myth of Persephone and Demeter and all that. That was just, you know, the gods did this, and it was an interesting maybe moral lesson or an understanding of, if you took it literally, this is what the gods and goddesses did. But embedded within those actions and those symbols was a huge amount of deeper knowledge. I think this is what's there in the New Testament and the Old Testament for that matter, and many other scriptures for that matter. So what we're dealing with, I think, is something that is there. We're looking at it, but unless we peel away the layers of our own prejudices and opinions and attachments, we're not going to see it because it's not coming from our prejudices and opinions and attachments. It's coming from something in a level of consciousness that's free of those things. So we have to be free of those things, at least to some extent, to be able to absorb what's actually being taught here. So awareness, key factor.
Yes, you're talking about a kind of mythic awareness or an expanded awareness, and
Yeah.
how do we get there then? And also, so you're going to walk us through a series of teachings that a kind of overview of what you've been doing and the research you've been doing and what you have come to understand. Can you kind of tell me what that's going to look like over the next few weeks?
Yeah. Well, first, to establish what we just said, because the entire thing is based on this. The entire thing is based on you have to change your level of awareness in order to understand what's being taught. What's being taught on the surface is good and important, but it gets much better than that. Okay? So as a result, how did they shift their consciousness? What happened there? That's not something that I could find, only theorize about for a period of time, until I ran across a video on YouTube. See, YouTube can be useful. And it was from a channel called Esoterica, and the host of the channel is Justin Sledge is his name. Very scholarly, very good. He gets into all kinds of very esoteric things and Western magic and things of that nature, which we are not getting into. But he introduced this idea that has been researched by several authors, that what was being taught in original Christianity was a form of Jewish mysticism. And without his video, I would never really know this, because the authors, the scholarly research that's been done is, as he put it, obscure and very expensive to get a hold of once you do find it. Not easy to find and very expensive. It's kind of like this thing that I've noticed, that a lot of scholarly research is not filtered out to the general public. They know it, but we don't. And to get it is very difficult. It seems to kind of defeat the purpose of the research, but that's how it seems to be right now. So he brought it out, which was an extremely valuable thing to do, I think. And what is said here is that there were forms of Jewish mysticism that existed at the time that Jesus taught, and especially Paul spread this message throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. And these forms of Jewish mysticism seem to be at least the basis of what was originally taught by Paul to these different groups of Christians in the Eastern Mediterranean. So what we have then is the basis is a mystical approach that seemed to be the important part. We don't have those methods in the Gospels or in Paul's letters because they were meant only for, I think, the initiated. And the hint is there in the Gospel about that too, that Jesus says, I speak to you in parables, speak to rather the public in parables, but to you, his apostles, I speak directly about the kingdom of heaven, not in symbols. So there was some direct teaching that he did not give to the general public. We have the general public teaching. We have the parables. We don't have the direct teaching. And it looks, at least to me and several other scholars that know much more about this than I do, that this may be what that direct teaching was. So, and as an overview, you have to change your level of consciousness. These teachings changed your level of consciousness. They were mystical, meaning you went within and found spiritual levels within yourself by means of using these teachings. Okay. Later Jewish mysticism, at least later in terms of popularity, did the same thing, but it doesn't seem that necessarily they were talking about Kabbalah, the things that we know about Jewish mysticism now that became very popular and is widespread and somewhat diluted for the general public. So these earlier forms, which are called chariot and palace mysticism, chariot meaning, it seems to me, traveling through these various levels of awareness, how you get there, what you have to do, and palace meaning you get to the highest level, the palace of God, and what happens when you get there. What happens when you get there, and these narrations of these things are not there in the New Testament. They're in some apocryphal writings, Old Testament writings, that do correspond to this, what's referred to in the New Testament by Paul. So this way of getting there is something that necessitates a change in awareness. It seems to tick the box there as to what you need to do to change your perspective from your ego and all your likes and dislikes and memories and history to something deeper that's not as obscured by all of those experiences and all of those emotions and so on, and memories, that we kind of clear our minds of those things, allow our minds to be more still so that we can see better and not see through all of the stuff that we've put in our minds and in our personalities. It's not dictated by personality. It's dictated by level of awareness that's essentially beyond personality.
It occurs to me as you're describing that it's like the basis of all groups of like monks or nuns and their practices where they're isolating and they're essentially changing their state of consciousness. They are essentially eliminating the ego as much as can be said, and kind of, and then studying. And yet they're working with texts and their interpretation of those texts and these teachings. And whether or not they're in that, I'm not sure if they're aware that that's what they're doing. I mean, I was really intrigued when you said that that there seems to be that these teachings haven't been that knowledge hasn't been given to the public, and that's like systematically over time, and that's how these groups, kind of. They've always been in charge of and taken care of these texts and these interpretations. So I'm just interested to have you dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's been part of tradition from the very beginning to be able to alter consciousness, because we can't see what the full levels of reality, especially if you take your five senses, which is how we get most information. It's all sensory input, and what we can perceive is a very narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum because our senses are geared for our physical survival. That's crucial. We don't have that, we don't have anything. So nature geared our senses to pay attention to what's there in our immediate environment that would help or hinder that survival. But that's not what's involved in the full understanding of who we are or of creation. So I think all spiritual systems started with something like this, all of them, in some way or other, that we were given teachings by someone. In the case of Judaism, maybe it was something that was not locked in to this level of awareness, not locked into ego, memory, and so on, sensory input, but something beyond that. And based on that experience of it, the teachings came out. Jesus being in that state, Muhammad meditating for all that time before he had the revelations of the Quran, Buddha, and on and on and on it goes. Lao Tzu, all these people were in a certain level of consciousness, had the experience of this level of awareness, and tried, especially something like the Tao Te Ching or something, trying to communicate it in words, and it sounds all contradictory and strange, and what is he talking about? Because it doesn't conform with our black and white dualistic waking state of awareness. It's something much more unified that unifies the paradoxes of the waking state. This level of awareness is the crucial factor in understanding any of this. And this level of awareness is what was promoted, I think, originally by these systems. It got lost. It simply got lost. It's very easy to be distracted by the outside world and be pulled in by our
I'm not
senses.
sure if it got lost or if it was, I'm not sure based on what you said. Did it get lost or did it get purposefully hidden?
Well, I don't know. I think in the beginning, maybe purposefully hidden, especially Christianity, because you can't control people in a society that are totally independent and beyond any of your rules and any of your ways of life, any of the social norms. And a lot of these people, especially in India and so on, did not abide by social norms by any stretch. And Jesus was condemned for breaking the law, the Jewish law, over and over again, and by doing things that they didn't want him to do. He did stuff on the Sabbath. You weren't supposed to do that. He hung around with, the outcasts of society. And he did the cardinal sin in that. He shared food with them. That was a big deal. And he obviously most deliberately did these things. The woman at the well, I think that's in the Gospel of John, is a Samaritan woman. The Samaritans were outcasts as well. But he went right up to her and spoke to her. All of these types of things show that he did not necessarily obey these social norms that were there at the time in Judaism. So that was one of the things they condemned him for. So this type of stuff means that when you experience this level of consciousness, the restrictions that are there in the outside world have very little meaning for you because they're all made up. We made them up. And I see this same type of thing happening to Christianity. The same thing that Jesus kind of condemned. I don't know if he condemned it, but he was certainly against it, saying to the Pharisees that you obey the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. And yet I see so many Christians going, it's written in the Bible here, that's the law, that's it. And I think Jesus would disagree with them quite strongly. That's not really what he was teaching.
So we have to find our way to this state, these states of consciousness, or this state of consciousness. And I'm assuming that the path to those are embedded in the teachings, or is that what you've been studying?
Yeah, from what I can see, the actual method I'm not totally sure of, except in general, which would be put the ego aside. put all the activity of the mind aside and see clearly from a silent level. Then you can do these other things. The miracles that are talked about, which people would say nowadays, oh, that's impossible. They are impossible for us because we're not coming from that level of consciousness. When we do, they're not impossible. And so there's all these ways of explaining away the miracles. I think they may very well have happened as they're recorded. I wasn't there. I can't vouch for that. But neither was anyone else that talks about it. Not these days. So what we have to do, I think, is reorient our perspective on this. When Jesus was talking about certain things, what was he saying? You know, the people look at, for example, the Gospel of Thomas, which was found, I believe, a part of the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt in the late 1940s. It was discovered. And it's made up of all these sayings, about 60% of which are in the New Testament. Some of them are more primitive sayings, some of them are more elaborate, sometimes the endings change. And there are a bunch of sayings that are not in the New Testament. And a lot of them, you just read them and say, what are they talking about? What is this? It makes no sense. And we're trying to decipher. I've heard many theologians say, I've tried to figure that out for past 20 years or something. I don't know what they're saying there. And we never will, I don't think, I don't know for sure, of course, but it seems to me we never will if we stay at the level of intellectual, rational interpretation. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not the whole picture. The whole picture involves this other level of consciousness with the rational mind. Okay, so there's a bigger perspective here than what we've applied, I think, to the teachings. The Gospel of Thomas makes no sense on the surface. A lot of the sayings in the Gospels themselves in the New Testament don't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, just in terms of our own behavior, show me a Christian that turns the other cheek. Slap one and okay, slap the other one. Go do it. I'm not saying there aren't any. I'm just saying I haven't met any. And these teachings that don't seem to correspond to the way we live. It's like, is this unnatural? When you're on the animal level of existence and you're fighting for survival, it would seem unnatural. But coming from a deeper level, it's absolutely the natural thing to do. There is no question of it. So this is I think the missing piece in this whole thing. The level of consciousness that produced these teachings was actually taught. Jesus was called rabbi, which means teacher. So these things were taught by Jesus to his inner circle and to his apostles, to the disciples, and then to the general public. And I think it was kind of watered down at each step because everyone wasn't ready to handle these teachings. And he actually says that in one of the passages in the gospel. I have much more to tell you, but you couldn't bear it right now. So there's much more there, said right out straight in the gospels right in front of us. No one seems to be saying anything about it. However, when you look at this teaching of Jewish mysticism, since it was there at the time, and they were all Jews that wrote this, it seems to make sense that this is probably what was being taught by Jesus, maybe in a new way, maybe with a totally fresh perspective. It certainly galvanized everyone because he was able to project it to the public. There's passages in the gospel saying he doesn't teach like other teachers. He teaches with authority. There's something more there in that teaching. There's some more power there. There's some more energy there than would be there in a regular teacher if they would run across normally. So his ability to project this outward would be the third part here. That the teaching, secret teaching, but what happens as a result of having this teaching. And this, I think, you see in the Acts of the Apostles, especially in the first chapters having to do with Pentecost. You see it in the miracles of Jesus. You see it all throughout, really, the entire Bible, but it's represented in different ways. The prophets.
Kind of
and so,
takes me back to our conversations when we did our conversations about the Course of Miracles,
Mhm.
because essentially it's a change from seeing things in that binary perspective into seeing things in this entirely interconnected perspective.
Right, right. And seeing it naturally. This is simply how you operate. There's no artificial forcing. There's no, oh, yes, I'm here and I can do, claiming all kinds of stuff. It's just there quietly, obviously. You don't have to do anything. It's a part of who we are. It's the way we can function if we allow ourselves to open up and not get caught up in all of our own personal problems and especially emotions and things. So,
For those of us, or for those who may not know about Pentecost, um, could you just give us a brief, like, what are you talking about when you say Pentecost?
yeah, Pentecost is actually a Jewish festival. And on that Jewish festival, the apostles were gathered together, I guess maybe in hiding after Jesus was crucified. We don't really know, I don't think we know the amount of time between the crucifixion and Pentecost. But whatever it was, they were gathered together, and in the Acts of the Apostles, it said that there was a sound as of wind and tongues like flame above their heads, and that the Holy Spirit descended upon them, and they went out and started preaching and healing people, laying on of hands, and producing essentially all kinds of phenomena that went on long after Pentecost. And this dramatic type of thing started happening. Jesus was doing this stuff. You don't find too much evidence of it in the Gospels that anyone else was doing it. He did send them out for healing and doing healing things. So he did teach them that while he was still alive. Well, he taught all of it while he was still alive. But there is some mysterious aspect here where the Holy Spirit, he says, or at least it's recorded, he said, could not come upon them without Jesus dying and not being there physically anymore. That calls upon some very esoteric teaching that we really can't get into here, but that seems to have a relationship to this. But whatever it is.
And I'm also, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm also wondering about that tremendous break or that tremendous trauma or grief of his crucifixion and death, and then the separation that might put people in a state where they could experience it. Because when you have the teacher with you, right,
Yeah.
you can't really get to that point. But when I'm just guessing, that just came to me as I was listening to you. But when you go through a trauma or that separation or the loss of the teacher, then you're in a different state.
That could possibly be true. Yeah. Well, obviously you have to let go. But if what's recorded is true, he had risen from the dead and they saw him before Pentecost. So they kind of didn't let go of him fully. Although he wasn't here as he always was every day physically, he would simply appear and do whatever he did. And
he wasn't always recognized.
That is the chief thing that's in common in the resurrection appearances. They didn't know who he was, even though they knew him very well. At first, they didn't recognize him. Mary Magdalene, the two disciples on the road, and all the apostles, even when they're out in the boat and he was cooking fish, Jesus was cooking fish on the shoreline, and they didn't recognize him. So there was something very different about him. Something had changed, dramatically changed, because these are people that knew him very well, yet they didn't know who he was at first. So there is something much more here than what is written down in the accounts. It's implied in the accounts. And if we begin to look at it from this other perspective, the implications do get a little clearer as to what was actually happening. And they erase some of the very dogmatic, black and white, strict understanding of Christianity. that this is probably the way we take it, at least from a fundamentalist point of view, is not the way it was taught. It was not even what was being taught. What was being taught is very important, to quote a minister in the past who said, Jesus told us to love one another. So what do? We worship Jesus. And that's kind of it. We're ignoring what he taught. We say, oh, Jesus saved me, when he says in the New Testament, you can call me master and, do all that. And if you don't do the will of my Father, I'll say, get away from me. I never knew you. Again, these passages are just ignored, passed over, because it's easy to ignore them. It's easy to not love your neighbor, to condemn someone because they're homosexual, or whatever you decide to use as a criterion that's in the Bible. Instead of, did Jesus hang around with homosexuals? Probably. Maybe some of his apostles were homosexual. We don't know. To even allow that possibility, people don't do. Of course he did. If you love everyone, you love everyone. Everyone. And that's what he taught. So I see a tremendous corruption in terms of ego, in terms of I'm justified, you're not, which is exactly what he was not preaching and not teaching.
So over the next few weeks, we're going to go through this, series with you, and cover the root teachings of Christianity, these hidden teachings, the state of Christianity as it is, or as you see it today, the basis of the teachings, what they are, and some connections that you've made using that example of Pentecost. What did that example of, what has all of this shown you, or how has it changed you in your relationship and your view of Christianity?
It's drastically changed it, because my understanding of it is quite different. And the implications, I think, of it are that it's not exclusive to Christianity. God didn't create Christians, and that's it. That all of these spiritual systems, including shamanism, were all in touch with this deeper level of awareness and had at least a clearer point of view of what was actually going on. That we have, latched ourselves onto various religions, and we say this is true, and we interpret the scriptures on the surface and just say this is the way it is. And so something that is saying something different has to be wrong. When the paradoxes are resolved, when you get to a more unified level, and the actual task of religion to get us to that deep level, I think, has basically failed in terms of, mainstream society, especially in the West, that we have not done it. There are pockets of people that do these things, that do practice these things, that do foster inner development so that we can get there and then look at these teachings. They're not in the majority by any stretch, but they're there. So it's, I'm not alone in thinking this. I may be alone in thinking some of these things, and all of this is my understanding. And I'm willing to change that understanding if I see I'm off somewhere, But I think we have to be flexible and open in order to grow and in order to get a more accurate understanding of all of this.
Any final words or teachings you'd like to share before we leave today? And then we'll dive in next week with, I guess, our first. Yeah.
The only thing I would emphasize is that the state of consciousness is the overarching theme throughout all of this. Okay, that's what it's all about. To come from this state, then you will see these things. And I'm sure people that come from the state that are more in that state will see more than I do. And that would be the value of that. If there could be a group of practitioners that would talk about this, maybe more things would get clearer. Who knows? But keeping in mind, level of awareness is the crucial thing.
And, before we go, I just want to emphasize, do you think there's multiple ways to get to this state of consciousness?
Yeah. Yep. There would have to be. If it's built in by nature, nature has created a tremendous diversity from the unity. So all of diversity is rooted in unity. Anybody at doing virtually anything could get you to unity. To get you there in a way that's systematic and reliable is the important thing. And there are all kinds of ways of doing that too. There's no one way that's right. Whatever gets you there is right, you know. Whatever gets you through the night.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. All right.
Okay.
Well, I'll look forward to next week when we take our first dive into these teachings and the state of Christianity. Thank you
Yeah.
again.
Yep. Thank you. I look forward to it too.